Philippians chapter 1 is where we are, and let me show you for the note takers, but even if you're not a note taker, that's okay. This is how we broke down the entire chapter. We saw the people that were involved here in verses 1 and 2, prayer in verses 3 through 11, and we are finishing up tonight the profitable problems section, verses 12 to 30, and I will show you where we are at because we already started that. We just didn't finish that last section. A lot of good info in here. Now, here's where we're at. The profitable problems. Why were the problems profitable? Well, because they furthered the gospel, number one. How did they do that? Well, it was evident to everyone that Paul was ministering to. He was sharing the gospel with everybody. So the fact that he was in trouble actually promoted the gospel because he was sharing it with all the Roman guards. But it also encouraged evangelism in other people. Other people jumped in there and said, Paul's in prison. He can't go out preaching. Let's get out there into the streets and let's go preach. And so it encouraged evangelism. Those two things may not have happened had he not been in trouble, not had those problems. And then the second thing that it did was it furthered the gospel, but it also fostered faith. It means that it encouraged faith. It stirred up faith. How did it do that? Well, number one, it did that. We saw last week in verses 19 to 26. It did that through fellowship. Paul started out by saying, because I was in trouble, he said, you Philippians prayed for me. And then God gave the Spirit. And so you had this unity, this fellowship going on between the believers in Philippi, but also between God and His Holy Spirit, strengthening Paul during that time. So it encouraged or fostered faith through fellowship. Now, tonight we will see the last two ways. They go right underneath fostered faith. Okay, so there's three things that as it encouraged their faith, it did it in three different ways. Number one, through fellowship, right? And then tonight, beginning at verse 27, through faithfulness. Okay, he's going to encourage them or challenge them to remain faithful. Look at verse 27. Only let your conduct be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you, so if I'm released and I come and see you, or if I'm absent, I might get killed, or maybe I just won't make it back to Philippi. But either way, I may hear of your affairs, that's the way that you're living, your life, that you stand fast in one spirit, with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel. Now, verse 27, that word worthy, that's a word that we oftentimes, we get tripped up on that word worthy, the W word. Because in our minds, to be worthy of the gospel, to be worthy of anything related to God, in our minds normally translates to perfection. Well, if I'm going to be worthy of God, that means, God is perfect, so I've got to be perfect. Well, obviously that is not what is being said here. Paul is telling them to let their conduct, that is the way that they are living, be worthy of the gospel. But what does that mean? Well, the word worthy means becoming. Becoming. Not like, are you becoming a good baseball player? We're not talking about that. We're talking about something that is becoming. Something like maybe you put on a shirt or a blouse, or you've got your favorite dress on, or you guys have a nice suit, and someone might tell you that is very becoming. In other words, that's really helping you look good, is what that means. It means that my conduct, when he says my conduct, or your conduct, let your conduct be worthy. He means let your lifestyle, let the way that you live be worthy of the gospel. What that means is that my lifestyle, my life, the way that I conduct myself should complement and not contradict the gospel, what God is doing. The way that I'm living should complement what God is doing and not contradict it. That's what he means there by saying, let your conduct be worthy of the gospel of Christ. It doesn't mean be perfect, although that is what we're striving for. We do want to be perfect. But we also understand that though we're striving for it, we're not going to reach perfection on this side of heaven. We'll reach it when we get to heaven. But right now we're in these human bodies, finite bodies, weak bodies that struggle with sin and, weaknesses and things. So what he's telling them there is the way that you're living your life, Philippians, should complement the work that Jesus is doing. Now, we obviously want to heed that. We should be striving for our lifestyles, the way that we live, to complement the work of God, the gospel of Jesus Christ. That should be one of our goals. Now, we're not doing that in order to earn points with God. We're not doing that in order to earn our salvation. We're doing that because he has given us salvation. And because he has given us salvation, and along with that, given us his Spirit, so we have what we need in order to live a life that is pleasing to God or that is worthy of the gospel of Christ. So he's charging them. He's telling the Philippians, you got to strive to live better, to be better, to live in a way that is complementary to the gospel of Christ. You might put something on, winter formal. Maybe it's winter formal time, or obviously in a couple of months here we'll start to have proms, and so you all will get dressed up in your dresses, and the guys will put on their suits, and we'll get to see you on social media or whatever, looking all slick or whatever. But you may go to try on a suit or a dress or something, and you might have a parent with you or maybe a friend, and they you put something on and they go, nah. Now I do not understand this. When people say, oh, that really brings out the color in your eyes. I do not understand that. Usually those are the ladies talking to other ladies. But, sometimes mom will do the same thing. Oh, that brings out the color in your eyes, son. And you're like, well, I don't even know what that means, but okay, I don't understand that. Girls are so funny when they talk to each other, man. Aren't they, guys? Like they'll see each other, and they'll just like drop oh, hey, gorgeous. And I'm like, man, like what is we don't do that, right, guys? We don't do that. We don't look at each other but they'll just look at each other like, oh my, and then they'll just get like this close to one another. And like look at each other's clothes and like, hey, gorgeous, you are so beautiful. Oh my gosh, and they'll just get, and they'll just go. It's the craziest thing. But you might put something on and somebody tell you, no, try the white one on or try the red one on or whatever. They're looking for something that's going to complement you. You've got a beauty about you, not the guys, we don't have beauty, right? We're tough. But someone will say, you know what, no, that doesn't complement you. Let's find you a different color. Or it might be a different size or whatever. Well, listen, same thing. He's telling the Philippians the way that you live should should help the gospel of Christ be appealing to other people. So it's an excellent charge. Only let your conduct be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or I'm absent, I may hear of your affairs. In other words, I want to hear good reports. And then here's what he says. He says, this is what I want to hear, that you stand fast. Now that means to hold your ground. In the Christian life, we always want to be moving forward. But the truth is that there are times when the attacks of the enemy, things are going on, and I have to stand my ground and not back off. Now, what I do not ever want to do is I don't ever want to take steps backward. Now, I do that because of, again, the weakness of my flesh. And sometimes I start to take a step away from the Lord, and I'm starting to back up and, not holding my ground. But we always want to be moving forward, or at the very, very least, standing fast, holding fast. That phrase, stand fast, means hold your ground. Don't back off, don't back up. And it's a good phrase. And it's something that we ought to strive for also. You might feel like, I'm not really moving forward. Okay, well, that'll come. But in the meantime, hold your ground. At least don't go backward. And he tells them how to do that you stand fast in one Spirit, and you'll notice that that's a lowercase s there, because what he's telling them is that you should all have not the same Holy Spirit. They already had that. But you should just have the same spirit. Everybody just understands, like school spirit or team spirit. Just everybody's got the same idea. He says, in one Spirit, with one mind, in other words, one mindset, striving together for the faith of the gospel. So notice what he's doing is he's telling them he's encouraging them here. I already said it, faithfulness in verse 27. He's encouraging them or charging them to remain faithful. And then he tells them how to do it. Do it together at the end of verse 27. One Spirit, one mind, striving together. That phrase, striving together, is translated labored in chapter 4. So we'll get there. We're in chapter 1. Chapter 4, so give me like 8 months and we'll be there. In chapter 4, it's translated labored. Same thing, laboring together, striving together. But right here, when he says with one Spirit, one mind, striving together, what he means is wrestling side by side. Now, what oftentimes happens is the Christians, instead of wrestling side by side, okay, you take this side, I'll take this side, and let's get them, let's go, let's partner up, let's do this together. What happens is we oftentimes turn toward one another and end up wrestling or fighting one another rather than fighting against the enemy side by side. And Paul is telling them, striving together, stand side by side and wrestle. Put up a fight, stand your ground, don't back off, move forward. But the best way to do that is to do that together. And that's really what the church is for. Now, when I say the church, I mean revival as a whole, but I also mean our high school ministry, but then I also mean, the other Christian churches, Bible-believing churches that are here and there and all over the place, all over the world. We should be wrestling side by side. We're partners in this gospel. We're partners in the Lord. And so Paul was always encouraging the churches that he wrote to unify. Because it's always going to be a little bit easier to live for the Lord when you're doing it with your brother or your sister rather than going it alone. But some of us are like lone rangers, right? Some of us are like lone rangers, and we just want to do things alone. It's always best to have other brothers and sisters that can encourage and challenge and push you, and then you do the same for them. So wrestling or striving together, wrestling side by side. So he encourages them there. He says, look, we would basically, Paul's like, hey, we wouldn't even be talking about these things if I wasn't in the midst of these problems. So the problems that Paul was facing are actually furthering the gospel, but they're also fostering faith, encouraging faith through fellowship. And then here he is encouraging them to remain faithful. And there's one more thing that he mentions here in verses 28 through 30, and that is fearlessness. Fearlessness. Verse 28, and not in any way terrified by your adversaries. That's enemies, adversaries. Which is to them a proof of perdition, but to you of salvation, and that from God. But notice how he started out in verse 28. And not in any way terrified. So stand your ground, unify, stand next to one another and fight together. Not with one another, fight side by side. And then in that way, in verse 28, you will not be terrified by your adversaries. Adversaries means those that are against you, those that are opposing you, or opposing the gospel, really. You and I must understand that people are not going to always accept our message. In fact, very few are going to accept our message. The greater majority are going to reject our message. Why is that? Now, here's what happens. We oftentimes make the mistake of feeling like they rejected us, but they're not rejecting us. This isn't my message. This isn't my word. It's God's word. It's God's message. God is the one who sent his son Jesus. I didn't do that. All I'm doing is telling you what I've read. And so if somebody rejects that, they're not rejecting me, they're rejecting what God has sent for them. They're rejecting God's message. So I need to remember not to take it personally. Now, it's hard because the individual that hears me sharing the gospel is not seeing God, they're seeing me. And so when they reject what I have to say, they're oftentimes aiming that right at me, leveling that at me and saying, you are this and you are that, and you're a liar or you're a whatever they're thinking. So I understand that, but you and I have to get in our minds that this is not my message. I'm just telling you what God said. That's it. But he tells them here not to be in any way terrified. Did you know that fear is actually a choice? Fear is a choice. You are afraid to run across the Scott Road freeway. Why? Because cars are flying. Because if I run across the Scott Road, man, I'm going to get hit, and cars are going so fast they'll never find me. Just poof into a million pieces. But we make a choice to be afraid of doing that because we see the cars going by. Right? So we make that choice. And sometimes fear is good. That's a good fear. That's a good fear. Being afraid to fall off of a tall building, that's a good fear. Being afraid to get bit by a dog, that's a good fear. Because those things keep you safe, right? But there are other things, like in this instance, in verse 28, where we choose to be afraid when we do not need to be afraid. Did you know that Paul, the same writer of Philippians, wrote to his friend Timothy, a young man? And he said in 1 Timothy 1:7, he said, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." That's a calm mind. Wow. Fear is a choice. And I can choose to trust God, or I can choose to be afraid of the circumstances or my adversaries or the hard times or the trouble that's going on. But it's a choice. What am I going to do? If somebody comes home, or you find out that, oh man, this person is sick, they've been diagnosed with this sickness, I make a choice. Am I going to be afraid of that sickness, or am I going to trust God? What am I going to do? So I make a choice. And oftentimes I choose to be afraid because of what? Because of outward circumstances. In the same way that somebody might level their rejection of God's gospel, they might level that at me because I'm the one presenting it. Well, I oftentimes do the same thing in a sense. I see somebody or something, and then I choose to be afraid of that individual rather than trusting God. Perfect example of the way to do this is the story of David and Goliath. I'm not sure. I feel like David was like a chihuahua. Anybody got a chihuahua? Chihuahuas do not know that they're little, do they? They do not know that they're little. And I don't know what it is about chihuahuas. It's like I've never met a nice chihuahua. They just all, he was like, hey man, they just always are like, on the attack and going for the ankles and just, trying to kill you, On my, riding my bike, and I've had, more times than other dogs, it's been chihuahuas come running out of the yard at my bike. I don't know what it is about them. They don't know that they're tiny. They don't know that they're little. And I feel like David was that same way. Like he saw Goliath, this giant, 8, 9 feet, whatever he was. But David, yeah, he saw a giant out there, a warrior. But why wasn't he afraid? Because he understood what he saw as being bigger than Goliath. He saw God as being bigger. And so he chose not to be afraid of Goliath, but rather to trust God. So we want to learn that same secret, that same thing. Paul is telling, hey, listen, don't be terrified of those who oppose you, your adversaries. Now, I don't know who was opposing them. I know that in Acts chapter 16, Remember the story of the slave girl from Acts chapter 16? That happened in Philippi. And when Paul cast the demon out of the slave girl, her owners came against Paul. That's how he ended up getting in trouble and getting arrested in Philippi. So maybe it's those same type of people. I don't know. I don't know who was opposing them. But when he says here in verse 28, when you are fearless against those adversaries, it does two things. Number one, in verse 28, it is a proof to them, to those individuals that you're not afraid of. It's a proof of their perdition. What is perdition? Perdition, what does that mean? It means eternal damnation. In other words, hell. So Paul says when you are not afraid of those who oppose you, it's proof to them that they will be eternally damned to hell. That's what that means. Wow. And then he says, but to you, in other words, it's a proof to you of salvation, and that from God. When you are not afraid of the adversaries, not only is it proof to that individual that I'm not afraid of you because you are going to hell, but also it's proof to me of the salvation that I possess from God. So that fearlessness. But remember that 1 Timothy 1:7, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. So I want to make sure that when I'm afraid, I'm asking him for that. Wait a minute, God, I know you didn't give me a spirit of fear. So I need that power and that love and that sound mind, God, please. He goes on in verse 29 to say, for to you, it has been granted on behalf of Christ. Granted, it's been gifted to you. Not only to believe in him. So he's saying it's been gifted to you. You were chosen to believe in him, but also, we don't like the second part, but also to suffer for his sake. Now he's writing to the Philippians, telling the Philippians, listen, you've been chosen by God, you believe in the Lord, but also you've been called to suffer. We don't like that. Nobody wants to suffer. Nobody does. But as we're learning through this passage, man, problems can be so profitable. Problems can be so profitable. And so I'm getting to the point in my life, because I've been, for a long time now, many years, learning these things and relearning and failing and relearning and failing and relearning. I'm getting to the point now where I'm starting to welcome the problems. When there's a problem, my first thought is, all right, God, what are you going to do here? So some of you were here on Friday. And then I get the news. Hey, there's some miscommunication. There's no bus. There's going to be a bus later, but the bus is coming late. My first thought was, all right, God, what are you going to do here? It's not my problem. It's not my problem. It's God's problem. But the problem presented a wonderful opportunity to trust God, or to go, you know what? Everybody, just take your stuff, go home. There's no camp. Nah, we're going to wait. We're going to stick around. Let's see what God does. And what did God do? He provided a bus and a free driver that was not planning to come pick us up, but all of a sudden he was free, and he shows up, picks us up, gets us up there. We get a hot meal when we get up there. And so we got to see God work in that way. Why did that happen? Good question. I do not know. But we got to see God work. And then we saw, if you were at camp, you probably didn't see a lot of the problems that Ella did and Jaden did and Ryland did. There were technical problems all weekend long. But those three got to see God work through the problems. And they can tell you, got to ask them. Ask them about camp. Ask them, hey, what happened? And what was going wrong? Everything. But what happened? Camp happened. That's what happened. And people were blessed, and people worshiped, and people learned. We had fun. So God worked through the problems. They got to see it. Those problems this past weekend, I guarantee you, ask them, the problems were profitable for them. because it allowed them to see God work. That's what happens with problems. So we want to get to the point where when the problems arise, we welcome that and we go, you know what? Nobody wants problems. Nobody wants to suffer. But through that, we get to see God work. And you know, the truth is, and we all know this, we don't like it, but suffering is good. Suffering is good. You cannot have that sweet grape juice unless you crush the grapes. You cannot get this guitar to sound beautiful unless you stretch the strings. It's through suffering that you and I are refined. And so we want to get to the place where we go, you know what, a problem? Okay, I don't like problems. I don't like to suffer, but man, let's see what God does here. Let's see if he stretches me and makes beautiful music with my life. Let's see if he crushes me and makes my life sweet to those around me. Let's see what he does. Paul is telling them the problems were profitable for different reasons. Here he tells them, listen, you Philippians, you're going to suffer. We all know here, we're going to suffer. And then finally in verse 30, having the same conflict which you saw in me. How did they see it in him? Because they saw him get arrested. And now here is in me. This is the craziest thing, verse 30. Paul, the preacher who had come to preach the gospel to the Philippians, when he was there the first time, the last time they saw him, he got arrested. Now, he's somewhere else, and guess where he's at? Arrested. Can you imagine? Yeah, the last time, where's Pastor Chris been? I don't know. The last time we saw him, he was in jail. And then someone was like, oh, yeah, no. I just heard from him. Oh, really? Where's he at? He's in jail. It's like, is the guy just always in jail? What is he doing? And that was Paul. And Paul says, listen, you saw me. You saw the conflict. And now you hear that there's a conflict. So they knew about that. They were well acquainted with that. But the conflict in Paul's life was producing sweetness. It was producing beautiful music. And unless we're crushed or unless we're stretched, then our lives will not produce sweetness and they won't produce beautiful music. That's what brings out the beauty. That's what brings out the good stuff. It's the suffering. We don't like it, but the fact is that it is profitable. And again, shameless plug. Next week we're going to be in the sanctuary, and I said, you know what, we're not going to have a reserved section, so you're gonna have to find your friends, and some of you might have started to freak out at that point, like, oh my gosh, what am I gonna do? I don't know what I'm gonna do. But there's a problem. There's a challenge. What's God gonna do? That's what you want to do. You want to hand that over to him and say, hey God, what are you gonna do? Hook me up with some friends. I want to come to church. I want to see my friends. I want to worship. I want to hear the Bible study. What are you going to do, God? How are you going to orchestrate this? So we want to learn to give those problems to him, allow him to have his way with those things. Father, thank you so much for tonight and for your word and for